Welcome to People More Interesting Than Me, the podcast, where I step back and let fascinating individuals take the spotlight. Join me as I sit down with incredible guests who captivate and inspire, showcasing their stories, experiences, and wisdom that make them truly extraordinary. Tune in for engaging conversations that'll leave you enlightened and entertained. At least I'm entertained. Our guest today, Zen Ben, a man who did what many of us only dream about. Ben walked away from a conventional career, leaving behind the daily grind and the 9-to-5 routine to embark on a profound journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. He joined a Zen temple, immersing himself in the ancient practices and philosophies that have guided seekers for centuries. In this episode, Ben shares his story that led him to make such a bold decision, the challenges he faced, and the transformative experiences that have reshaped his life. Whether you're seeking inspiration to make a change in your own life or simply curious about the path of Zen, you won't want to miss this. Enjoy. Can you kind of explain how you got to the point you are right now you said it's a Zen temple in Berlin. Is that did I
Yeah,
remember that correctly?
that is correct.
And to be fair,
Uh,
I feel like there's always an interesting reason that a person would like. You probably can go throughout the building right now, and everyone has an interesting story of how they
mm,
got there.
mm,
Because I don't know, this sounds stupid, but it's like, back in the day, their dad was a plumber. Their dad was like a I don't know, something like that where it was a trade. Like
mm,
they didn't go to as their father wasn't at the Zen temple. Their grandfather
mm,
wasn't at Zen temple.
mm,
It's more of I don't know. It's kind of like a break in the cycle if I've ever heard it. But
mm, mhm,
obviously I'm completely wrong, and that's why you're on
mm.
this podcast.
It's a really good question. Um, and like in a nutshell, the answer is it made sense. And I can I'll happily elaborate on like how did I end up being where I'm at right now. Um, about a decade ago or so, I started my career, and I had been in a very scientific rationalist understanding of the world and also how to live my life. So I had a plan for like what a good life means for me. And I had actually I started my career as a management consultant. I had a very specific as a management consultant, like your career progression, etc. Everything is set in stone. Um, and on top of that, I also had a girlfriend back then who was very keen on like starting a like traditional family. Like let's buy a house with like a fence around it, two dogs, like a couple of kids. Um, and I had signed up for that like notion of what it means to have a good life. Um, just coming out of like my teenage years, my like period as a student, and thought this is what's gonna make me happy. Um, and so I had achieved all the goals that I had set, which was basically like be on the verge of starting a family and have like a high status, like career prospect wise, really promising job. And I started living that life and realized it made me terribly unhappy. Um, the job was deeply meaningless. The relationship, partially because I worked so much, partially because I honestly was just a bit terrible at being like a good boyfriend and partner. Partially because we had very different ideas, and I think that came out throughout the years about what like what do I actually want? Like how do I want to live my life? And so throughout the first couple of years of like working and like my job like sucking the soul out of me, the relationship falling apart and whatnot, um, I had to face the question that I actually didn't know what I want and what is even good for me, and like what does it mean to me to live a meaningful life. Up until that point, I had been very much I'd say trapped in my head, trapped in my mind, so to say. Um, and so like against this backdrop of like being unhappy, I also struggled with like winding down. Like work was constantly on my mind and whatnot. And so I rediscovered meditation. I had lived and studied in Asia, so I had a bit of like an access point to meditation, but I had rediscovered that. Um, and Set a 10-day Goenka style Vipassana retreat, and came out of that retreat with like three pretty big realizations how I want to change my life. The first one was to like give up drinking, because alcohol had been a slippery slope for me. Whenever I went out and drank, 3 pints became four, four, five, and so on. Um, I also was able to see the harm that it had done in like my own family with like other relatives and friends and whatnot. So I decided to go to like quit drinking, to go dry. The second big one was to become vegetarian, and I realized that I just didn't want to eat meat anymore, kill another like sentient being, so I can eat it. It just didn't make sense anymore. And the third one was to like shift from focusing on my career as the thing that's going to make me happy to relationships slash a romantic relationship. I think back then there was a more narrow focus on like romantic relationships to like as my core raison d'être, like my reason for being, so to say. Um, and that started over the years an evolution of like meditating more and more. I've kept sitting more and more retreats, and at the same time also like changing my path in life quite distinctly. From this very like career focused, I work at a corporate and like climb up the ladder, to like that being what I came here to do, to honestly not knowing what I came here to do. I think right now it's probably about like becoming freer. And a large part of like the Zen practice that I currently do is around like becoming free, free from like the thinking mind, free from all of these like shoulds that we have, free from like the worry about tomorrow, free from like the regret of the past and whatnot, and just be in the present. Um, and so I reckon in a certain way like being absolutely in the present moment is possibly the ultimate freedom. I haven't like tapped into that space yet. Um, but yeah, that's so I started out with like a very clear goal in life, a very specific plan, and then that plan turned out to in reality just be like not fitting. It was like a piece of clothing that just chafed. And so I started taking that off. And over the years, I explored more and more meditation, realized more and more that my mind is can really be a terrible master, and that there's value in like finding ways to train my mind, so to say. And then, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of our conversation, meditation is like a really challenging endeavor. Like you sit down and you can't outrun, distract yourself. Like you have to face what comes up. Um, and that is insanely useful in terms of like discovering your own patterns, the things from the past, etc., that influence you. But it's also quite often not a pleasant process. A lot of like the things that you otherwise avoid do show up and knock on your door. Um, and that's why ultimately I like moved into a Zen temple. Partially, I was also just looking for a place to live. I wanted to like intensify my practice. I was looking for like a teacher, and so I trained with like a Zen master here. And so I was kind of like looking for all of these. And then this temple kind of like popped up out of the blue. And I was like, sweet, this is it. It makes sense. Like this is what I currently need to do with my life.
Okay. Uh, by the way, can we record on your end? It seems like it's a little bit choppy coming into mine.
Okay, yeah, sure. If you tell me how to.
If you, let me see. If you go to, let's say more, the three dots
Okay.
at the bottom right, you click
Yeah,
that, there
yeah,
should be an option.
yeah, yeah. record on this computer. I already clicked that.
Do you
Is there
see
a way you can
a
verify?
you see like a red dot up in the corner?
Yeah, and I see pause, stop recording. Like I do have
Perfect. That
two
means it's
buttons.
recording then. So at the end, you'll
Okay.
see a window pop up and just tell you like it's processing or something like that. Then at the end, just shoot
Okay.
me the audio. It's just good if it doesn't make it
Okay.
over to me well. That way I can
Mhm.
overlap it and get the good parts. Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, my first question is, can you kind of explain what a Zen temple is? Because when I hear Zen temple,
Mm.
I think, like a Buddhist temple. That's what I imagine.
Mm.
I imagine, you're going without, you're kind of isolated. Um,
Mm.
I read that like that commercial book. I forget the monk who sold his Ferrari.
Mm.
Have you heard that
Ferrari.
book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
haven't read it, but yeah.
it I mean, it's like one of those ones you see at the airport,
Mm.
self-help book. Yeah, just kind of explain what that is, obviously, because I'm thinking from, a compound word type of thing. When I hear two words put together, Zen temple, I'm thinking,
Mm.
like recentering, and
Mm.
I have no idea. So if you can, yeah.
Yeah. Um. And in practical terms, the way you can imagine it is like a shared apartment that has a like Zen practice, which for most people, meditation is something they've at least heard or possibly like practiced themselves. So like that includes meditation, that also includes prostrations, kind of like this bowing thing, and chanting, like a singing type practice. Um, and that's like the three forms of practice we do. Plus, we also have interviews with like the Zen master, and the interviews are a meditative like riddle kinda. So like it's a question for like a meditative riddle would be the Zen master is asked, "What is Buddha?" and he replies, "Dirty shit on a stick." Or like dry shit on a stick. And then you have to answer that question. And in a certain way, it's a test of your perception, of your like, how good are you able to put down your thinking mind and the understanding of this words doesn't make sense. Like, isn't Buddha this kind of like maybe a statue or this like a historic figure or like whatever? And just like, what is happening in this like scenery if you put your thinking like aside? Um, and then you give an answer to that. And so you also have this like interview component. Um, and the, 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 what we do here is we live together. That's like the shared apartment. We all have like jobs. We all cook our own food and whatnot. So we still have access to like the worldly world. I can still go out and like rave at Berlin, like techno raves. And at the same time, on weekdays, we do have like our practice sessions. And so that's what it means here in like very, very practical terms. Um, on a more abstract level, I guess, like, um, I mean, Zen is a substrand of like Buddhism. Um, and Buddhism is deeply like pondering on what does it mean to live a good life? What does it mean to live a happy life? Um, and so if you practice quote unquote Buddhism, then you in a certain way engage with this question in a very empirical kind of like fashion. It's not that much philosophy. Like Zen particularly is very like it, it stripped out all of the philosophy theory part, and it's about your pure and direct experience. Are you still there? I think
Yeah, I'm
the
I'm still here.
okay,
Cut out
yeah,
for a little bit. We're good.
okay, yeah. Um, and what I mentioned earlier about how I like started getting more and more into meditation is that when I realized in my late 20s that like the path I had embarked on wasn't actually what I wanted. I realized I was like um I didn't have a really embodied sense of what is like fun, what do I want, etc. And I can give you a very concrete example. If you mentioned you have kids yourself, you might have warned them to like not put their hand on like the hot burner, because it's hot and they'll burn their hand. And I think like I definitely do remember when I was a kid, the day I nevertheless put my hand on like the hot burner and burned it. I had to do that once, and the knowledge was embodied. Like afterwards, I never ever burned my hand again. Um, and I'd say Buddhist practices target a lot an embodied like understanding of reality, of what it means to be alive. And you do this via these practices that I mentioned. And so a temple is just a space where you can do this in a like a structured fashion with others. As I mentioned earlier, also on the like when you meditate, a lot of your own topics come up, so you can have uh, periods of like sadness, loneliness that often don't even seem to have a reason. And then it's nice to have others around you who can relate to that. Because if I shared that with I don't know, work colleagues, they might not be able to like relate to me, and they'd be like, "Wow, why? Like what's happening with you?" So yeah, so it's in a certain way, it's a space for community and structured practice to yeah, like break free, get out of your mind, see what's on the other side.
That's great because I can only imagine like, the people who are great athletes or they're we'll say great businessmen or, excel at the top of their field, they usually try to immerse themselves. Um,
Mm,
I wouldn't say wholly, but like to the best extent of how they can be the top. Like, like some people go to Colorado or I don't know what the Colorado is of Europe, but
mm,
basically to to excel their oxygen, they're like O2.
mhm,
I don't know the correct term for it, but basically their like their efficiency with oxygen just so they need
mhm,
to use less of it. So that's what I
mhm,
imagine you're doing here is basically you're syncing up with other like-minded individuals who um I think one of the biggest things I've read in the last couple of months, not couple of months, couple of years, is that if you really want to excel at something, you want to make sure you have the people that you hang out with, the people you live with, the
mhm,
people you work with, either at the same level, actually, that might be wrong, at a higher level, and that's where you kind of want to work towards. And
mhm,
that doesn't necessarily mean like what I'm saying athletically or like
mhm.
on a professional. That's like mentally. That's like
Yes. Yeah.
even spiritually, if you're feeling you're lacking in that way, you don't want to,
Mm,
like this is going to be stupid to say. I don't know if you've heard this phrase, but you don't want to be the best house in the neighborhood. I
mm,
don't know if you've heard that phrase. That's obviously from a
mm,
real estate point of view, but I feel like that's a good rule of thumb as a person. You always want to get better, maybe on every different level. So you don't want to surround yourself with people you're going to bring down. And I don't know if you've experienced this moving from your,
mhm,
let's say, I want to say 25 to 30 ranges. That's when like your friends thin out. Like it's the ones
mhm,
you see a lot less than you did before, especially if you have kids, because that's like a much larger differential equation where you have to put in like everything
mhm,
else. And what I'm trying to get at is like you see like your friends at that 25-30 range. I heard a statistic. It was like you will only see them maybe like 17 to 30 more times. Whereas, like when you were
mhm,
25 to like,
mhm,
before you could even say college or high school, you would see these people daily. Whereas now it's like a different thing altogether. So what I'm trying to say, circling back to my point, is being selective about your environment and who you hang out with is like the food for your soul and your spirit and your
mhm,
emotional well-being. So if you're not like eating or dining with these people or sharing all this time, it in the long run, it's just like someone eating something horrible for you. If somebody were to do the whole
Mm,
supersize me type deal, like eat McDonald's for, like breakfast, lunch,
mm,
and dinner, that's the same as if you were with someone, let's say, abusive emotionally or physically,
yeah.
like in a relationship.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
mean, it makes complete sense that you would want to go
Yeah.
somewhere at least to kind of recenter yourself. So, speaking onto that fact, what was it like when you first told this to, like friends and family, obviously, and
Mm,
leaving your I'm not gonna say corporate job, but
mm,
more
um,
traditional.
yeah. Uh, and one thing that I found interesting is that this decision has always made so much sense to me that I never had any qualms about sharing it. Like when I shared this, there was nothing around this kind of like what are what is someone else gonna think? But I was just like, this is so obvious for me to do. So like I'm just gonna do it. That felt really really powerful to have. Um, I've like I'd say my a lot of my friends they kind of like had an inkling that I'd be moving in such a direction, and I had mentioned beforehand that I was interested in ordaining for a while. I had spent some time at like a Rinzai Zen temple in the US, and so I had dabbled in that space beforehand. So it didn't come entirely out of the blue that I like dropped my corporate job and was like, I'm gonna, I don't know, like eat, pray, love. Um, and so they had a bit of an inkling. Nevertheless, I think I was mostly met with like curiosity. People were interested in like what is the space like what is it you're actually doing there. Have you become religious? Has actually been a question that a lot of people ask me. And I grew up in like um, being a like ridiculously strong atheist, like hyper rational like world. Um, and so like that was a relatively stark contrast for a lot of people. So a lot of people asked me that question. Um, and other than that, I've honestly like um, people met this with a lot of acceptance. Like I haven't met anyone who like criticized that decision or was like doubtful or whatever. But people mostly embraced it with acceptance, and I reckon I've also been really blessed in terms of like the people I hang out with, the family I have, that no one like broke off, burned down any bridges.
No, that's great. I mean, especially to have
Yeah.
such strong support. And I feel like that's more of a, like a nowadays type of thing, like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that wasn't a thing. And
Mhm.
I can't really speak to 20 years ago because that was like when I was like, I don't know, like 14 years old and had no semblance of the world. Um, what was I gonna say? I'm sorry. It's 5 a.m.
Yeah, absolutely. No worries. If you want to take a deep breath, feel free to.
Yeah, I,
Um,
I know what I was gonna say. So I currently, like, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, I recorded with a guy in America, and he kind of changed my perspective, at least on Buddhism, that it's not
mhm,
actually a religion. It's kind
mm,
of like a state of being, like a kind of betterment. There's like no strong
mm,
ties to like religion, and what I've said in response was like, I grew up and I'm from a diverse area. I'm like from a you actually I saw on your resume University of Virginia. Did
mm.
you ever go there? Or was
Not
it just a
Virginia, no.
satellite? Okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
DC area, like all different religions, all different races. But like Buddhism was never the only thing I really knew about Buddhism was the fact that it was in the world history like class. Other
Mm,
than that, you saw a couple of like small temples, but I saw it as religion. That's
mhm,
what I really saw it as. And when I
mm,
read it in world history or got other people's impression, Buddhism was, like a contender for
mm,
your like
mhm,
your I wouldn't say savior because
mm,
I don't think that really has ties to that. It was
mhm,
it was like your religion spot. It was like
mm,
your fourth or fifth thing you talk about sometimes when you're at a dinner party or you're like filling out like a census report. Like what do you
mm,
identify as? But when
mhm,
you the way he was explaining it, it's not really like that because he was saying you can be a Buddhist and you can be Jewish, you can be
mm,
Christian, you can be both.
mhm,
It's not like you have two people competing for the one spot in you. It's more of
mm, mhm,
a state of I don't know why I'm trying to explain it. You're the expert. Uh, but it rather than religion, sorry, not expert, but practicing. It just seems like the perception of being Zen or being a Buddhist.
mm,
It's the words have gained so much different stuff over the years just from like misinformation or
mm,
like maybe Christianity or Judaism giving it a bad. I'm not saying they did. I'm just saying like in the battle
mm,
of religion,
mm,
uh it like other religions aren't gonna like promote like Buddhism or
mm,
being Zen because they see that as a competitor. I mean,
mm,
that's normal. That's like anything. You would see something that takes another person's time, the way they live as something that um they could be doing, like praying or reading the Bible or sitting Shiva, stuff like that.
mm,
Like we only get so many hours to live and
mm,
the way we spend that time and religion is I'm not saying I think religion is great. I think it
mm,
teaches like morals, especially at a younger age, and it
mm,
makes you kind of accountable. It gives you that
mm,
um what's that called? Man, my brain. Uh that conscience in the back of your head. It kind of gives you a
mm,
self-regulating
mhm,
feeling of that. And I feel like
mhm,
that's really what religion and even probably Buddhism helps to do is give you that self-regulation, that feedback system where
mm, mm,
to if it's not already in you, it's helping you be a better person on all levels, not like it's not restricted to anything, like physically,
mhm,
spiritual,
mhm,
emotional, being a better person.
mm,
Um, but that's all I wanted to say on how do you feel that like Buddhism and Zen have kind of got a not a negative connotation, but a wrong
mm,
connotation by like the media and other
mm,
facets.
mhm. Um, and it's and it's a really interesting question, and what makes it so interesting to me is that this like the negative image that you see portrayed in the media. Yeah, I don't have that, and maybe that's like a cultural difference and whatnot. Maybe in the US it has more of this like it's brandished as something that's negative. But what it goes to show is that like ultimately everything hinges on your perception. And so, like, there is a strand that runs in your mind that says, um, I don't know, Buddhism is portrayed as negative in the media. And I don't have that. And so our reality around how we interpret Buddhism is different. And I think that's like, um, what made like what makes the current place I'm at, and I don't know how long I'll be here, but like what makes it interesting is that firstly, there doesn't seem to be any absolute truth. There is like I've never come across a scenario where it was like this is absolutely wrong and this is absolutely right and you shouldn't be doing this. And that really, really resonates with me because in my life I haven't come across any like absolute truth yet. Everything that I've encountered so far is relative. Like, do I like someone? Do I not like them? Like, do I assess something as good or bad? like I have not come across a single thing that is really like an absolute on its own. Um, and so like that's resonated a lot with me. I found that really, really interesting. What's also drawn me to Buddhism, and over time, I've honestly gotten more open to other religions as well because there's a lot of like parallels. Um, is that firstly, I found a lot of people who practiced Buddhism, and by practice I mean sit down and meditate. They were deeply inspiring in one way or another, and often they shared something with me that really enriched my life that I in the beginning didn't even understand what they were talking about. Like, what is this wisdom kind of thing that you mentioned? Um, so that's been really luring me in. And the second part, and I have like grown up in a very like scientifically based, empirically like evidence based kind of like mindset, is that a lot of like Buddhist traditions have progress maps, so to say. They say, do this, and sooner or later that's gonna happen. When that happens, do this, and then something else is gonna happen. And so it's a verifiable approach where you can say, I follow the practice, and sooner or later it'll have this effect that has been shown by thousands of practitioners. And I found that really, really interesting in terms of like a journey into my own self. So like there is these states that I can, or I can change how I look at things. I can change how I perceive the world. Um, like I can change what's important to me and what isn't important to me based on an evidence-based system, so to say, that works. And then I can, if I want to, and this is just an example, I can fabricate a reality, so to say, that's more pleasant for me, where I wake up in the mornings and I'm happier, where like the juice is juicier that I drink, where like the worries I have are lighter. Um, and so I found that interesting, and like it made a lot of sense to me to look at it this way. Um, one of the big challenges that I think a lot of particularly institutionalized religions have is that like theory often takes over practice. Like even Christianity has like meditative practices, but they've been stripped out for like the lay people. I don't know about like clerics and whatnot, but they've been stripped out to the largest extent, and it's mostly about reading the texts. And it goes back to the argument I made earlier on about like burning your hand on a stove. And I'll give you a different one. I don't know whether you've ever been to Nigeria, but reading a book about Nigeria, reading the Lonely Planet travel guide about Nigeria, and actually feeling Nigerian sand under your feet, two very, very different experience. One is imaginative, the other one is like the real deal. And a lot of institutionalized religion has stripped out the trip to Nigeria and instead given you the Lonely Planet travel book for like Nigeria. Um, and in a certain way, if you would like build an institution, it's quite easy to like start having hierarchies. You start having like power plays and whatnot. And so there's value actually in like not giving people the trip to Nigeria, but instead just telling them in Nigeria you should behave like this. Because if they haven't actually been there, it's easier to make them believe, so to say. And so like for me, a large part, and that's what I found appealing about Buddhism is this very like hands-on approach. You can actually mostly get rid of the theory. The theory is kind of like a manual. But if you don't do the bench presses, you're not gonna like gain muscle. You can read about doing them, but it's not gonna work. And so that's what I found really interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, when you were first talking this at the beginning, it seems like in my completely inexperienced background, what I see it as is obvious is a great example that were you comparing it to bench pressing because when I think of it on this level, that other people are trying to giving you a perspective on the different levels and where you should be at, and they're trying to explain it to you, and you don't really understand. It makes complete sense. I mean, if and anybody listening, I mean, unless you are incredibly feeble and you don't know how to do anything, it's like when someone tells you something that's so foreign to you. It's like before you have sushi, it's like before you know how to play an instrument, it looks foreign to you. It looks like something
Mhm.
that you're going to hate. It's like somebody watching, a lot of people might not do this, but a foreign film that's a really good film, but it's in black and
Mm-hmm.
white. And they're like, oh, I won't
Mm-hmm.
like that. That's black and white. I'm used to, like Michael Bay explosion type movies where this thing that's going to make me feel something I don't want to do. Whereas, like, if you're doing the reps, and it's just as much as, your muscles, your brain is a muscle that,
Mm-hmm.
like, if you're not thinking or meditating, because I don't know if it's like this in Germany. I would imagine it is as so since it's Germany, but the hustle mentality, like always, on to the next thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, did you did you finish like your certification for this, or did you get that promotion, or like
Mm-hmm.
it's always not like congratulations. Wait, what are you gonna do to like celebrate? It's like, what are you doing next? And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's not just like
Mm-hmm.
that professionally, but it's also like that personally. Like if you have a family, what people ask you. I mean, it goes throughout your whole life. Like when you graduate high school, they ask you, where are you going to college? Where are you going to uni? And then as
Mm-hmm.
soon as you're in college or uni, the question switches to, what are you going to do for a living? And then and the same thing with relationships. Like when you get married, it's like, when are you going to
Mm-hmm.
have kids? And then when you have kids, it's, I don't know. I don't know what comes after that, but basically it's just, like just like you said, it's like you're in your job and you had like a set plan for you that was like, this is what's going to happen to you. It's like somebody was giving you not just you, but like most people, like a brochure. So we've already planned
Mm-hmm.
out your life. This is what it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
right here. You're going to have about 2.5 kids. And this is what your end salary is going to be at retirement. And, you know, that for some people that's like the sad what they're gonna be like, what's gonna happen to them. Would you
Mm-hmm.
suggest like would you suggest this on everyone? Like is this like what you're doing, would you suggest to that everyone does, or that they start off with maybe meditation for a small amount of
Mm-hmm.
time? What's your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Um, I like I'm definitely not wise enough or know enough to like make any general suggestion. Um, uh, in a certain way, I think all of us like suffer. All of us have made the experience of like loss, grief, anger, like hate, any type of like negative emotion. And in a certain way, that's a really connecting experience because in that suffering, like knowing that everyone else has suffered as well, you actually like it gives you access to like common humanity. So that's actually a beautiful thing. And so I guess the message that I'd rather say is that like um, if you suffer, that gives you an entry point into something that's bigger than yourself. And the moment you like transcend yourself, the suffering is also gonna end. So like that's an insanely powerful like avenue. Um, whether people like get there via like meditation, swimming or whatever, like it's entirely up to them. And I think at the end of the day, the beauty of a human life is also that you like make the choices and do the things that you do, and you have skin in the game because it's your life. And so like you get to experiment and find out. And so like that's absolutely wonderful. Because whatever it is you do, you will get feedback sooner or later. Like things are gonna happen. If you cheat on your partner, that'll have consequences. If you're faithful, that'll have consequences. And so all of these things are basically like a giant unfolding process that gives you feedback. And so if you're interested in changing bits and pieces, if you're unhappy with something, then there's value in like looking at that and trying out something new. And whatever that is up to you to find out and experiment with.
Okay. No, that's great. And that's kind of along the lines of what I was thinking with like, I don't know if this still holds. It probably holds for some stuff, but you've heard about like the 10,000 hours. Like you become a
Mm,
master after 10,000 hours. And to be fair, like if I was if somebody's been meditating for 10,000 hours, obviously they would, you know, be an expert at themselves, be expert at their thinking process, how to
Mm,
regulate and everything that, like someone born in today's culture who hasn't had a second to kind of breathe mentally would
mm,
be kind of, like a tiger, like a Leon Messi to like a kid playing outside. You know what I mean? Like
mm,
there would be a huge gap between the two. Um, so where do obviously you're doing coaching. Where do you see yourself in the future with this, or even as a
mm,
person,
mm, um,
or you hope to be? And this isn't like one of those job
mm.
interviews where I'm asking like, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Where do you see yourself in this company in 5 years' time?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Honestly, I don't know, and I feel like a lot of the answers that I give you start with I don't know. Um, and there's a possibility in that not knowing. And in the past, this would have been very scary. And I think also like our society has built systems that like try to mitigate the unpredictability of life. You have insurance. If something happens, you're taken care of. You have retirement plans. Once you're old, you're taken care of. Um, and so we try to like get rid of everything that we don't know because it scares us, but we can actually befriend that. And so where do I see myself in like a couple of years time? I honestly don't know. I do coaching because I realized that I really enjoy working with people. One of the things I disliked as a management consultant is that like Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations are very static, like they're inorganic, and I like working with things that are alive. And like one of the most alive and like fascinating things are human beings. This sure, like they have these infinite minds with their like everyone has a unique story. Your podcast is called People More Interesting Than Me, so everyone has an interesting story. And so I find that really, really fascinating. And working with people as like a coach allows me to like alleviate some of the suffering that everyone experiences, to like help people, to help people live a life that feels more meaningful for them. And so I really enjoy doing that. I'm currently tinkering with the idea of like going back to university, studying psychology, becoming a therapist. Um, and currently, that is like a loose direction that I'm heading in. Knowing myself, having lived on this planet for 34 years, I also know that this can change. And one of the big realizations that I also have had in this life is that, like, regardless of what I do, if it's for longer than 6 hours a day, it just doesn't work for me. Like, there's just like economists would say, the marginal utility is just like negative at a certain point. Um, and so like I, I reckon I already know that I wouldn't want to work full time as a therapist. Um, but like blending things, exploring, yeah, keeping on this path to I reckon become freer is where I'm heading, whatever that entails. Currently, work with others, their emotions, their inner world, and my own more, because it's still a very like juicy territory to be in.
No, that's great because it seems like you're trying to, instead of like, the traditional mindset, like I was saying, like milestones about reaching, it's more about
Mm,
milestones internally to you that you want to reach rather than something, more materialistic or like traditional,
mm,
which makes a lot more sense to me. Uh,
mm,
okay, last question. What is something that your parents did that you'd like to pass on to a next generation? And
mm,
what is something on the flip side of it that you would do new or different that your parents did?
mm. And what I have realized over the years, and I think most people at some point in their lives have a like challenging relationship with their parents. It's as any relationship, it evolves. There's like better periods, worse periods. And what I realized over the years is that my parents are actually insanely accepting and open people. So like this like me not engaging or like following a bourgeoisie life, but instead kind of like veering off and living at a Zen temple. Um, I have met nothing other than acceptance from my parents, and that's insanely powerful as like something to have. Um, and often when I talk about acceptance, a lot of people wonder like, but if I accept everything, I'm not going to make changes anymore or whatever. Like I just accept that I like my life sucks. And I'm not gonna like do what's necessary to change. And that's like that's where, in my opinion, wisdom comes into play. Like, be wise enough to figure out what to change and accept the rest. And then acceptance is an insanely powerful tool to have. So acceptance is what I believe, like what makes your experience more pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And then regarding the other question, and partially, I think, at least if I talk to a lot of like my friends, our parents are boomers, and they had like they were not necessarily, and I don't know what like plays into this, but they were not necessarily really in touch with like their emotions and their inner world. And so I grew up in an environment that was definitely loving, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm emotionally like hyper tuned. And partially my parents like worked a lot, so they just weren't around a lot. But I feel like this is something that like my generation, our generation is rediscovering, like being in touch with your emotions and like having that as an enriching force, rather than something that is like detrimental. Or I'm like sad or I'm really happy, but I'm at work right now, so I kind of like need to stay level. Um, so I think this is something that in a certain way is like the torch that our generation carries. And it'll be really interesting to see what like the next generation then brings forth.
Yeah, that's the way you ended that. I don't think I've ever thought of that opinion because, when we look at clothes nowadays, well, not nowadays, but like thrift stores, everybody wants to get the fashion that was like 30
Mm.
years ago. So, I mean, obviously I don't see it going that way with, mental or emotional intelligence, but like here's hoping that doesn't, if anything, it's going to be like robot rights and AI rights. They're going to have their, and people are going to be, I don't know if there's a term, but racist towards robots, racist towards
Mm,
AI. They don't
mm.
deserve rights. And I'm gonna sound so woke or whatever the equivalent to woke is for robots in like 30 years. So this is gonna set me up. And obviously the robots are already listening to me, so they're gonna, like favor me. Uh, but thank you, Ben, for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I hope
Thanks for
I
having
hope you
me.
had fun.
I did. I am I'm in deep awe of your 5 a.m. rise to make this happen. I feel honored. Thanks.
So where can people find you?
Um, People can find me on Substack. So I do have a Substack, and I reckon that's the best starting point. Zenben.substack.com.
Okay, sounds good. Well, have a good rest of your day. Um,
You too.
See ya.
If you like this week's episode of People More Interesting Than Me, please follow me on Apple Podcasts so you won't miss out on more episodes like these.